I'm thrilled that today's guest, Nick Kristof, is an American journalist, political commentator. We're going to have 2 Pulitzer Prizes, as if one was not enough. He's a regular CNN contributor and, of course, op-ed columnist for New York Times. And I think nobody has done more for injustice, social injustice, for the underdog, for poverty, for famine, for so many social injustices in this world. And I salute you as a human being beyond as a journalist. And well done, my friend.
Thank you, Donnie, and great to be with you.
Yeah. I'm going to start with a quote from Bill Clinton from 2009 that kind of sums you up, and it just this is going to embarrass you a little bit, but that's okay. There is no one in journalism, anywhere in the United States at least, who has done anything like the work he has done to figure out how poor people are actually living around the world and what their potential is. So every American citizen who cares about this should be profoundly grateful to someone in our press establishment cares enough about this to haul himself all around the world to figure out what's going on. I'm personally in his debt, as we are all. So as I said in the intro, there's nobody I could think of in the entire spectrum of journalism that has done more for the downtrodden, for the underdog, for the suffering people of the world. And where did this piece of your heart come that you just felt this calling to do all this major work for the underdog?
So I think there are a couple of elements to it. I mean, my dad was a World War II refugee. His family had spied on the Nazis during World War II. They had family members executed by the Nazis and also executed by the Soviet communists. And, then he was welcomed by the U.S. as a refugee. But certainly through his family, I saw in a very real way the consequences of repression and also how much difference it can make when people sponsor a refugee. The other is just, when I started at the New York Times, I was covering exchange rates and oil prices, very different world. But when you go and cover a massacre or a mass atrocities, it just wounds you and it haunts you. And so you want to go back and cover more, and you feel that sense of purpose. And certainly that was true of me in my career internationally, that I found some purpose in trying to shine a light on things that were happening in the hopes that that makes a difference. And, here and there it does. And then meanwhile, at home, my little community here in rural Oregon went through the ringer. And
you talked about that, baby. Like 25% of the kids you go on a school bus either died of suicide or drug overdose. I mean, what was growing up like that about?
It was, when I was growing up, the kids on the everybody was doing really well and life was getting better. And the 5 kids who got on the school bus right after me were the NAP kids, and their dad had a job laying sewer pipe. Their mom had a job driving tractor. And when the oldest kid, Farland, who was my grade, when he turned 16, his family gave him a Ford Mustang. And I was like so jealous of him and Farland and the whole family. But none of them graduated from high school. And then good jobs went away, and meth arrived. Actually, partly Farland was one of the first people to cook meth in our area. And then, one by one, they were lost. Farland, he abused alcohol and drugs, and he died of liver failure. His younger brother, Zealand, died in a house fire when he was passed out drunk. His brother, Nathan, blew himself up cooking meth. Their sister, Regina, died of IV drug use. And the baby brother, Keelan, died at the beginning of the pandemic of an overdose. And, you just see these 5 kids dying one after the other, these 5 smart kids, and their mom is still alive in her 80s. And it's just wrenching. You feel, in so many ways, it felt like these overseas humanitarian crises, but right here on this soil, and a failure of this country to address this crisis all around us.
You've been so consequential in the fight against sex trafficking. I remember reading one of your pieces in the Times that really changed the math. One of the big porn aggregators, Pornhub, really changed the way they do business. Talk to us about that.
Well, that was also something that came to me not intellectually, but just through my reporting. In 1997, I made one trip to Cambodia that to write what I thought was going to be one article about sex trafficking. And then I'm in this little village and I see these 12, 13-year-old girls who've been kidnapped from their homes and they're being auctioned off for their virginity. And if they tried to escape, the police would have arrested them and handed them right back to their traffickers. They were terrified. I realized that they were all going to be dead of AIDS by 18, 19. And it just felt like 19th century slavery in so many ways, except for the AIDS element. And so, I wrote my story, but it kind of haunted me. And then I went back and wrote more. And then I began to wonder about the situation here in the U.S. in terms of trafficking. And, it is different, but we don't have the moral authority to tell Cambodians to clean up their act unless we make greater efforts here at home. And so I began to write about trafficking here. And then, that led me to Pornhub, which was at that time infested with rape videos. And it felt like we were kind of collectively shrugging at it. And I talked to, so many girls who, had been raped, and then the video was recorded and posted for other people's delectation. And they, several of them had attempted suicide. And so it turns out if you write about it, then, it makes a difference. And so Pornhub immediately took 2/3 of their videos off the site because they didn't have consent of the people in it. And look, none of this is perfect, but here and there, incrementally in journalism, by shining a light on something, you can make people spill their coffee and take a step towards some kind of a better outcome.
You are still kind of an optimist. You've seen the worst. You write about how you see the worst at Tenement Square, but then you see young people riding in on rickshaws to try and help people out as this atrocity is going on. Talk to me about that dichotomy.
So I travel around the world and I see some really terrible things. I was just in on the Uganda-Congo border, covering the impact of U.S. aid cuts, and kids are dying, and it's wrenching to talk to parents who are losing their kids because of our policies here. But you also see this incredible strength. We're not really tested here in the U.S., Donnie, because we have things around us. Yeah. We don't have warlords rampaging from door to door. But meanwhile, in other countries, when people are tested, it turns out they're capable of incredible reserves of strength and courage and decency. One of the persons who really left a deep impression on me kind of captures that. The worst and the best. She was a woman in Pakistan, rural Pakistan, named Mukhtar Mai, and a village council had ordered her gang raped because of something that her brother had supposedly done. He probably actually didn't, and then the village council carried out that order and they gang raped her. And their assumption was that she was then going to kill herself out of shame. And instead, Mukhtar found it within herself to report the crime, to prosecute her attackers, to send them to prison. And then she used compensation money for that rape to start the first school in her village because she believed that education was the best way to chip away at the cruelty and misogyny that had led her to be victimized. And then she enrolled the children of her attackers in her school. And you just can't be in this little village and see the children of her attackers in little school uniforms studying English and math and just not feel that we are an incredible species capable of tremendous cruelty, sure, but also of tremendous strength and resilience.
Talking about the human condition and that you've given the upside of it, how do you explain the evil? This is almost an impossible question to answer, but you've seen so much, the evil of a genocide in Darfur or this child sex trafficking, or what man is capable of doing to other people. What man, I don't mean men from a masculine point of view, but what the human species is capable of. Explain that, how there can be such darkness in human, as you and I are talking, and we're basically decent human beings, flawed like everybody else, but it's such another universe. Talk to me about what your understanding of how dark humans can be and where that comes from.
I was the Tokyo bureau chief for the New York Times, and for a while, I became fascinated by Japanese war veterans from World War II, who were these, elderly men who were so nice to everybody in their village, in their town, to their neighbors. You could totally rely on them. And then when I sat down with them, they would talk about, stabbing babies in China during the war and trying to understand how fundamentally good people can do such truly evil things. And, then I saw that in Darfur and so many other places. And I think it's fundamentally that we have a capacity to otherize people and put them in this other category and feel no empathy. And when we do that, we are capable of incredible cruelty. And so the challenge becomes to prevent that otherization and to make people understand that the folks in that other camp, of that other race, of that other faith, of that other whatever, that they are just like us. And, that is an area where journalism can do some good. We can put human faces on victims. We can remind people of our common bonds of humanity. But I think fundamentally it's a lack of empathy coupled with fear for ourselves. And when we're afraid, we can do some pretty terrible things.
You talk about putting a human face on. I think it was Cambodia. I'm not sure. I can't remember, but you saw a bunch of guys on a bike riding with a head on a pike. And Indonesia, I'm sorry. And you basically walked up to them, and your theory is that once you shake someone's hand, they're less likely to kill you.
Yeah, that's right. That's whenever I'm feeling really nervous about people I'm interviewing, I make sure that I shake their hands. I make sure that I don't have a nice watch on that they might want to, take for themselves. And in that case, because they all had machetes and had just been beheading people, I also bought some food for all of them. I thought if they weren't hungry, they might be less likely to slaughter me. So in their case, for example, they were afraid of sorcerers. They thought that, the society had kind of disintegrated. There was during the economic crisis in Indonesia and Southeast Asia in 1997, 1998, and they were blaming sorcerers, and they thought that the people they were killing were somehow sorcerers. And, there's also, these are things, frankly, that kind of young men often do together. And I think part of it is their prefrontal cortex isn't quite there. I must say that I was sort of challenging them on, well, how do you know these are sorcerers? And they said, well, if they change into a cat, then that means that, that shows they're a sorcerer. And I was saying, well, this guy didn't change into a cat and you beheaded him. But I kind of realized that at some point you don't really want to antagonize too much people who have machetes
and chopping people's heads off. Yeah.
You
want to stay on the right side of him. So let's talk about Israel and Gaza. You've written a lot about it. You recently wrote a piece where you were responding to people like me who were saying, Nick, you're not seeing the whole picture. So for instance, when a lot of the arguments, if you're sympathetic to the Israeli side, is, hey, look, you can talk all you want about what's going on in Gaza. This can end in a minute if basically Hamas just surrenders. That's the way wars end. Basically, here's the hostages. We're going to put down our weapons. So talk to me why that's not a just argument against what's going on in Gaza. Because to me, I go, wait a second. This all can end in a second. All Hamas has to do is surrender. That's the way wars end. Just give up. Just say we give up. Here are the hostages. It all ends. Why is that not an accurate argument?
So it is a accurate argument, and it's true. And, I think it's also true that on the American left, there's been this kind of crazy sympathy for Hamas that I find bewildering. As somebody who repeatedly visited Gaza and saw Hamas, they are a really nasty, cruel, repressive, misogynistic, homophobic organization, and they're bad for Palestinians as well as for Israel. And so it's entirely true that there should be pressure on Hamas to back off, to relocate to some other country, and so on. But that's part of the picture. We don't have so much influence over Hamas. I don't think we can change the decisions about what Hamas does, although we can certainly try. But we do have real influence over what Netanyahu does. And I think that if Biden and Trump exercise their influence over Netanyahu, there would be a lot fewer Palestinian kids who would be dead in Gaza today.
How do you, as a Jew, I'm so conflicted, and because so much of it is I don't know what to believe. I don't know what to trust. Obviously, and you've written about this, a dead Palestinian child is no worse or better than a dead Israeli child. And if you're a humanitarian, you're a humanitarian. Yet I go back to the slaughter on October 7th, and there is this part of me that's like, fuck it. No, not that there should ever be dead innocent children, but this has got to end, and Israel's got to do what it's got to do, and there's no gray area here. But then I see things where I see innocent people being killed and famine. But then I hear the other side of it is, well, the famine is because Hamas is intercepting all types of aid that's going in. How do you know what to believe? How do you know what is coming in, that what is true, what is not true? Because if you listen to both sides, you will hear a completely different story.
So
I know that there's a lot in that question.
Yeah. So, I mean, for any journalist, it's a real challenge to figure out what is going on in Gaza. What's the death toll? All kinds of uncertainties. In my case, I talk to a lot of aid workers who are in Gaza. Obviously, I talk to Israelis, but I also try to talk to some Palestinians in Gaza. There's one man, he's a linguist from Gaza, this, very mild scholar who is very secular, absolutely the opposite camp from Hamas, who I've been in communication with all along as he's been pushed from home to the streets, starving, and he's been certainly part of my understanding of what's going on. American doctors who've gone to Gaza. And I guess what I counsel is skepticism on all sides. So, be skeptical of eyewitness accounts from Gaza, but also be skeptical of the Israeli version of events. And increasingly, I've come to see that the official Israeli version of events is just not trustworthy. And there were hints of that early on. Remember when the IDF shot 3 Israeli hostages who were, not wearing shirts, wearing white flags. And I think one of the lessons of that was that they were pretty trigger happy. They were shooting first. And, these are young soldiers. They're scared. But when they're shooting Israeli hostages, waving white flags, it sort of underscores that that's probably happening to a lot of Palestinians as well. And, on the food situation, it's pretty clear to me, talking to aid workers, talking to others, that Israel has blocked food, not only beginning in March in this case where they acknowledge that, but also much more broadly, that they were blocking birthing kits early on, things like that. So I become deeply suspicious of the Israeli narrative.
Yeah, people talk about a 2-state solution. How is there supposed to be a 2-state solution when even this morning there was a terrorist attack on a bus stop in Israel? They just shot 6 innocent people, including a woman who was 8 months pregnant. You're living next door to an overwhelming majority of a population that wants to see Israelis dead, wants to see Jews killed. How do you set up a 2-state solution when your neighbor has that mindset, when you're coming off a morning of this type of horrific tragedy?
Well, because the alternative is worse. I mean, Israel fundamentally has to choose between some kind of a 1-state solution, which is not democratic, which is, to me, when people talk about apartheid, I don't think the word apartheid applies to Israel itself, where, Palestinians have
So
the right to
you've
vote.
got,
They can
so you
serve
got
all kinds of roles.
2 million Arabs living there and having every freedom that every Israeli has, every Jew has.
Yeah, I'd push back at the exact. I mean, I think there are some gaps, but certainly many more civil rights than they have in Arab countries. But when you look at the West Bank, then I think the term apartheid is pretty much there, and so I don't know whether a two-state solution, frankly, is still achievable. But continuing the way things are with what is fundamentally apartheid in the West Bank, with something that is undemocratic, I think that's even worse. And so one has to push for this kind of steps toward getting along. And I think that massacring people in Gaza is not a step toward that.
No, it's not. There's been so much outcry about, obviously, people see the plight of the Palestinians, yet you see what's going on in Sudan. You see what's happened in Syria with the hundreds of thousands of Arabs killed, Yemen. Yet somehow when Israel is involved, it takes on a different tone. Why is that? Is that pure anti-Semitism?
No, I don't think it's that, although I think I'm sure there's an element of that. But in general, frankly, when terrible things happening around the world, people don't pay attention. And so
why is this different? Why the only math I can come up with is because it's Israel and because it's Jews.
So everything that happens in Israel in both directions gets much, much more attention. So the killing of Israeli Jews on October 7th attracted far more attention than the killing of several 100,000 Ethiopians in Tigray, for example. 100,000 Tigrayan women were raped, and it got almost no attention. So everything that happens within Israel and in the occupied territories is hugely magnified in
both,
the American.
You're saying from both sides. You're saying from
both sides.
Yeah.
And so, after October 7th, Tigrayans could have felt, how come, from their point of view, a relatively modest number of Israelis getting massacred and raped and tortured gets all this attention when several 100,000 of us get slaughtered, no one cares. And, there's a point to that. But likewise now, when Gazans are being slaughtered, it's also true that that's getting far, far more attention than what's happening in Sudan, what happened in Ethiopia, what happens to the Rohingya. Likewise, Ukraine was getting a lot more attention, obviously, than these other places. And part of it has to do with U.S. interests. The U.S. is obviously supplying weapons. In the case of Israel and Gaza, it also was supplying weapons in the case of Ukraine. They're kind of more direct U.S. interests. But I think there also is just this compassion and interest and empathy, and we tune out these crises that seem distant, like you mentioned, Yemen. And, the paradox is that sometimes it's easier to make a difference in places like Sudan and Yemen. I think if we just leaned on the United Arab Emirates a little bit more, it would stop supplying weapons to one of the militias in Sudan that is, by the U.S. officially says is committing genocide in Sudan.
Let's bring that back over here to our own borders. I think you can agree with me, and you've talked about this, that we have never been more divided. We have a Trump presidency that is like no other one we've seen. Give me your prognosis for the United States right now.
Boy, well, that's an easy one, Donnie.
Take an hour, okay?
So, I mean, you and I, we're kind of the same generation. So we saw how the U.S. managed to recover from the toxicity of the 1960s.
Yes.
When there were divisions in every house, not just geographically, but really within each household. I'd like to think that we can manage that again. I think it's really hard to predict exactly how that happens, but we have seen that happen in other countries as well as in the U.S. I I think that it's going to take the. I mean, I sort of give up for now on the Republican Party, although I hope that post Trump the GOP will be better. But I also think the Democrats have to not just hold Trump accountable and hold his feet to the fire, but also have to do a much better job governing blue places and providing a alternative in terms of governance, and also a much better job reaching out to working class Americans. And I think that we have done a really weak job of that. Here I am in Trump country in rural Oregon, and I have dear friends here who support Trump, and they just think the Democrats talk down to them, demean their faith, which is important to them. I think we've got to do a much better job. Democrats can't just succeed with college-educated voters, because those are a minority of the electorate.
Yeah. Hey, before I let you go, as a guy who's seen so much harshness, I want to end on Nick Kristof, the optimist. Give me some hopeful words for the future of why I should feel good about things.
So, look, when we were kids, a majority of human beings worldwide had always been illiterate throughout human history. Now we're pushing 90% adult literacy. That just transforms societies. It transforms the world. Kids are so much less, maybe the worst thing that can happen to anybody is to lose a child. When we were born, about 1/5 of all kids died before the age of 5. Now that's a really rare thing. About 1 in 25 kids dies. And so that backdrop of human progress, the emancipation of women, less homophobia, all that is still continuing. The march of science is continuing despite, funding crises and attacks on universities and so on. And I think we will get through this. I think that if in the last election when Biden stepped down, if he had tried to help anoint Josh Shapiro and Gretchen Whitmer, for example, as the Democratic nominees, boy, I think we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I couldn't agree with you more. That was a tremendous mistake with the Democrats. And so your newest book is out in paperback. It's a memoir. What are you most proud of about the book? Let's sell some books here.
So it's a way of exploring all of the challenges of the world and of the U.S., but it's called Chasing Hope, and it is about trying to provide a route to navigate through all these things, but reminding us of human potential, of human progress. And I've seen that in my career. I've documented the genocides, but I've also documented people who've managed to overcome them. And so I think I've seen the worst of humanity, but I come out on the side of hope, and I hope that will all, I think I can cheer people up just a little bit without blunting the awful things that are happening all around us.
Nick Kristof, the book out in paperback, Chasing Hope, a must read. I'm a big fan. You do God's work. Keep up all the good stuff you're doing, my friend.
Hey, thank you, Donnie. Be well.
Everybody, thanks for watching. If you like it, hit that subscribe button. And we love having you here watching On Brand. And just don't miss any future episodes. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll see you next time.